You ever wonder how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly? Or how a quiet protest can suddenly explode and topple an entire empire? It's not just regular change, is it? It's a total transformation, where something becomes its complete opposite. Now, on the surface, that seems like it should break all the rules of logic. But what if there's a deeper logic at play? Well, today, we're going to uncover it, with a little help from a 19th century philosopher and, believe it or not, a modern physics model. So here's the big question, right? How can something we define as A suddenly become not A? How does a stable system descend into chaos, or how does a seed, for that matter, become a plant? It feels like a logical impossibility, a real paradox that had thinkers scratching their heads for centuries. And here's the problem in a nutshell. You have state A, a thing that exists, and then it flips to its direct opposite, not A, where it no longer exists in that form. It really seems like you can't get from one to the other without breaking a fundamental rule of logic. A thing can't be both itself and its opposite at the same time. So how does the jump happen? And that brings us to our first big idea, the logical impasse. For a long, long time, thinkers were just stuck here. They saw change as this problem of pure opposition that logic just couldn't seem to solve. But one philosopher saw this impasse not as an end, but as a brilliant beginning. And the guy who cracked this? None other than the German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel. He looked at this apparent contradiction and thought, hang on, what if this isn't a failure of logic? What if this is the logic? He basically proposed that contradiction wasn't the enemy of understanding, it was the very engine that drives everything forward. And this is where Hegel drops his big idea on us. He introduces a completely new logic for understanding how things become anything. He called it Aufhebung, and it was his way of providing a third way out of that simple A versus not A trap. Get ready for this one. The word is Aufhebung. It's one of the most powerful and kind of tricky ideas in all of philosophy. It's often translated as sublation, and it describes the process that holds three totally contradictory ideas at the exact same time. That something is simultaneously canceled, preserved, and lifted up. Okay, let's really dive into this, because this is the core of the whole thing. First up, Aufhebung means to cancel. Think of a seed. When it sprouts, it literally ceases to be a seed. It's canceled. Second, it means to preserve. The sprout still contains the essential life, the core truth of that original seed. And third, it means to lift up. That life, that essence, is elevated into a new, more complex and amazing form, the plant itself. So, see? The caterpillar is canceled, but its very essence is preserved and then lifted up into this completely new form of life, the butterfly. This isn't just simple destruction, it's a dynamic evolution. It's the internal struggle to become something new that forces a system to overcome its own limits and emerge as something greater. Now, I know this might all be sounding a little abstract. Philosophy can be like that. So for our next section, let's make this totally concrete with a really cool and maybe unlikely analogy from the world of physics. We're going to look at something called the Ising model. Don't worry about the name, it's a foundational concept in physics, and it gives us this absolutely stunning visual demonstration of Hegel's big idea in action. Okay, the rules are actually pretty simple. Imagine a grid, like a checkerboard, filled with these tiny little particles. Each particle can only be in one of two states. Let's just call them spin up or spin down. Now, the key is that they all interact with their neighbors, and the entire system naturally wants to settle into its lowest possible energy state. And this is important. No individual particle ever breaks the rules. So at the start, it's just total chaos, a random jumble of spin up and spin down particles. This represents a state of super high energy and complete disorder. But then something amazing happens. Just through simple local interactions, particles literally just influencing their immediate neighbors, these small islands of order start to appear. You get these little patches of all up or all down spins, and they start to grow. This is self-organization, and it's happening from the bottom up, with no one in charge. And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this chart. You can see these small quantitative changes just accumulating, building up this internal tension in the system. More and more particles are flipping to align with their neighbors. Then it hits a critical threshold, a phase transition, and suddenly, bam, the entire system makes a qualitative leap into a brand new, totally ordered state. And this is a perfect picture of Hegel's idea. The system moved from state A, which was disorder, to state not A, which is order.
And it didn't do it by breaking its own rules, but by following them to their logical conclusion. The transformation came from the inside out, from the accumulation of all that internal tension. It canceled its disorder, it preserved its components, and it lifted itself into a new, more organized unity. An idea this big doesn't just disappear. This logic of transformation casts a really long shadow. In our fourth section, we're going to see how this one idea from Hegel ended up shaping the next 2 centuries of intellectual history. What's wild is that Hegel's idea was so powerful, it was immediately grabbed by totally opposing sides. You had thinkers on the left, like Karl Marx, who saw it as the logic of revolution, how a society's internal conflicts would eventually force it to create a new one. But at the same time, thinkers on the right saw it as the logic of the state, the ultimate stable institution that finally resolves all conflict. In fact, you could pretty much say that for the next century, almost all of European philosophy was operating in what the source material calls Hegel's gravitational field. Thinkers were either building on his ideas or desperately trying to react against them, but they could almost never escape his orbit. Almost. There was one fascinating exception. That exception was Arthur Schopenhauer, and he escaped Hegel's orbit not by fighting his logic of forward progress, but by proposing a completely different shape for reality itself. As this mysterious quote kind of hints at, Schopenhauer didn't see history as a line moving forward to something new. He saw it as an eternal, repeating cycle.
Okay, let's bring this all home. As we're about to see, Hegel's logic of change isn't just some historical curiosity. It actually maps directly onto some of the most advanced scientific ideas that we're grappling with today. So here's where it all connects. What Hegel called Aufhebung, modern complexity science calls things like emergence and self-organization. And what scientists might call noise in a system, those random flips or external shocks, that isn't just an error. It's the unpredictable, real-world energy that forces a system's internal logic to work, to adapt, and ultimately to transform itself. So if you take one thing away, it should be this. Real, meaningful transformation comes from this constant tension. It's the struggle between a system's internal drive to be what it is and those unpredictable external events that push it right to its breaking point, forcing it to become something new. And that leaves us with one last kind of mind-bending thought to chew on. What if destruction is just an illusion? What if all this change we see around us is simply the universe following its own internal logic, resolving its own contradictions, preserving what's essential, and constantly, inevitably outgrowing itself to become something new?